This is the fourth update on the project to install a 1996 Volkswagen 1.9-liter TDI engine into my 1997 Subaru Sambar Diaz Classic, model code KV3. This time I'll update you on my work done to prep the Volkswagen powertrain, including the timing belt, water pump, injectors, and injector pump. I still don't know if I will be successful with this engine swap due to some serious challenges mentioned in previous videos. Regardless, I know that I will use this powertrain somewhere, even if it isn't in the Sambar. If I fail to make the Sambar work, this engine will go into something else, and I want it to be reliable and live long. Let's start with the timing belt. In my opinion, anytime you are starting with an unknown service history like I am, you should replace the timing belt. In particular, these, and as far as I know, all diesel engines, are interference engines. Of course, this means that if the timing belt breaks, the cam, due to the resistance presented by the valve springs, will almost immediately stop, and no matter where it stops, there will be some valves open in the head. The piston or pistons will hit the valve or valves. The best possible outcome from that would be the need to rebuild the head. Now, it's also possible to have an engine that is so damaged that no part of the long block is salvageable. While the labor required to change the belt isn't insignificant, the parts are only a couple of $100s. Betting on an unknown timing belt is a gamble only a fool would make. Because my new flywheel did not arrive with a timing mark, I'm using a bamboo stick to verify that I have the crank at top dead center. With the injectors removed, I can jab the stick in to determine if the pistons are up or down. With some trial and some observation, I was able to verify top dead center of number 1. As you can see, number 1 is in the up position, 2 and 3 are at the bottom of the cylinder, and number 4 is at the top of the stroke. I found this interesting. All the how-to videos I watched on the AHU/ALH engines showed that the cam slot was centered on the camshaft. That would mean the cam lock bar would fit even if the cam were 180 degrees out of phase. On this 1Z, the slot is offset, so you can't lock the cam out of phase. There are many excellent tutorials on YouTube covering each detail of changing the timing belt, so I'll just show you the things that I thought were interesting. Oh, and I will preach some. Change your pulleys when you change your belts. Those bearings wear out, and failure when the engine is running is likely to lead to pistons striking valves. At best, the head would need to be removed and rebuilt, and at worst, the entire engine could be unrepairable scrap. During the timing belt process, I took the fuel injector pump off and replaced it with a rebuilt unit. I'll provide more details on that in a later video. So now the belt and pulleys are installed, and I have the engine ready to turn over by hand. Of course, I'm turning it over to feel and listen for any collisions between parts. If the cam timing is wrong, the valves may strike the pistons. Better to have that happen when there's only hand force being applied. There were no impacts, but I would later find out that I had the injector pump installed one belt tooth off. The pump was injecting too late in the piston cycle. It was an easy fix once I realized the error. A moment ago, I mentioned getting rebuilt injectors for this engine. After testing the original injectors, there was no other option. This is just another item in the long list of additional costs and additional jobs that are making this a very lengthy process. I admit that testing the injectors was fun. I got a pop tester from Vivo, and it worked just fine. This is the injector for the number 1 cylinder. It pops at a little over 2,500 psi, and the pattern doesn't look too bad. You can also see how quickly the residual pressure leaks down. Here is injector number 2. It pops at about 2,600 psi. Injector number 3 had a noticeable leak at the return fitting. It drained fuel faster than the other injectors. Also, to my eye, the spray pattern wasn't quite as effective. It looked like less vapor and more stream than the prior injectors. There was no question that number 4 was bad. As you approached 2,300 psi, you would get more of a dribble than a pop. Look closely at that squirt. I could make it pop, but clearly this is not a usable injector. I wondered what the refurbished injectors would do on the VVOR pop test stand, so of course I hooked them up before installing them into the engine. The results were exciting. All 4 injectors had dramatically improved leak down characteristics and no weeping. Even better, they ranged from 3,000 psi to 3,300 psi pop pressure. The fuel spray pattern looks good. Compared to what was in this engine, these are far more crisp and precise. I would have been pretty unhappy if I'd tried to use the old ones. Not to mention the fact that the weeping would drop fuel into the cylinders, wash the oil off the cylinder walls, and that would lead to premature engine wear. Changing focus a little, let me tell you about the oiling system problem. Right here you can see where the oil filter housing, oil cooler, and oil filter are supposed to attach to the engine. As you can probably tell, there's no way that assembly can be used, as the drive axle now fills that space. As usual, I was a little overly optimistic about my skills. I thought I would whip something up in an afternoon and solve this. Many days later and many iterations tried and rejected, I think I'm close. I believe I have an adapter and remote cooler/filter arrangement that will work if it doesn't leak. I did a test run that you will see shortly, but found a small oil leak in the manifold. I've since made repairs. I just need to wait for some favorable weather so I can roll the engine out and do validation testing. The reason I think there is a separate oil passage that feeds the head is because of this check valve in the oil filter housing assembly. The check valve allows oil to flow into that small circular hole in the block, but closes when the oil flow tries to move in the other direction. I think that check valve exists because the head is higher than the oil filter, and with the engine off, gravity would drain the oil in the internal passageways leading to the head. That means at startup, the oil would have to make its way up and through all of those passages before it reached the camshaft and the valve train, leaving those parts spinning for a few seconds without oil. By having a separate passageway to the head and a check valve in that path, oil will remain in those passages while the engine is not running. This is something I had to plan for when building my own adapter. How do I keep the oil feeding the head from succumbing to gravity when the engine is off and draining back into the pan? I'll talk more about that situation and the solution to it at a later time. What you are seeing here is the oil pump drive shaft. It runs the length of the block on the inside. On the front of the engine, there is a pulley which is turned by the timing belt. That pulley is connected to this shaft, which runs the length of the block back to the oil pump and the vacuum pump. The vacuum pump is necessary to produce vacuum to power things like power brakes. This is because diesel engines generally don't produce vacuum like a traditional gasoline engine does. In a gas engine, almost all of them have a metal valve that opens and closes to allow or prevent air from entering the engine to mix with the fuel. When that valve, or throttle, is mostly closed or fully closed, the descending pistons are trying to suck air into the cylinders. That's where the vacuum is produced to boost the power of brakes in virtually all cars prior to around 5 years ago. Now, a small number of gasoline-powered cars utilize electric motors to boost the strength of the brakes, though many still use that vacuum from the engine. However, this and virtually all diesel engines have no such valve in the intake, and the engine is always free to suck in as much air as the descending pistons ask for. With no throttle valve, there's no restriction, and hence no usable vacuum. Okay, the penultimate chapter of this update will be a listing of the standard automobile parts replaced thus far in preparation for this engine swap, and then we will close the update with a clip of the running engine along with the clocked transmission attached. New parts include a clutch plate, a pressure plate, a clutch throwout bearing, a flywheel bolts, water pump, thermostat, timing belt pulley, turbocharger, fuel injector pump, injectors, and glow plugs. Odds are that will not be all, but ultimately it shouldn't be much more than this. Thank you for joining me during my learning adventure, and I hope to have more progress for you next Tuesday.